didn't think I'd survive that. I'm jamming along with the radio science news theme and playing the banjo of science. Okay, sure. Some people say that's an oxymoron concept, but it's true. This is Richard Pollock, and I'm in the wilds of West Virginia up at Blackwater State Park, calling into the, broadcasting and hoping that Robert and Libby Strong will be calling into me from Smart Center Market. But today is Radio Science News, episode Saturday, May 8th, 2021. And we're kind of doing a split mixed remote session here. And so we invite you all to Radio Science News. Now, since Robert isn't here to get you to the site as we usually do, what we're going to do is let you know that you could go to smartcenter.org and start your journey there, or you can go directly to radiosciencenews.org. And since I have so many topics, I'm kind of leaning that way, like get there as fast as possible. When you get to radiosciencenews.org, you will see information on that page as to how you might listen to the live streaming on the 11 till 12 time slot on Saturday mornings. Up at the top says click here for audio streaming. You can do that, or you may alternatively go down to scroll down a little bit and you'll see that this show is rebroadcast on WEJP 107.1 FM radio. That's Wheeling Community Radio. And somebody told me that if you go to their site, you may also be able to stream it. So if you're out of the area, you can do that. Then our good neighbors at Robin Hood Radio, WHDD Robin Hood Radio, it's they tout themselves as the smallest NPR station in the nation. And we really like them for all those reasons. But we're partnering with them. They broadcast from 11 till 12 p.m. on Sunday, so tomorrow night. And recently we talked to them and they added a feature that you can listen to Radio Science News on demand from their site. So having said all that, there's a lot of interesting stuff on the first page. We would ask you to take a look at the Rossi blog, which is about some interesting alternative energy stuff that's happening. Always check out the space station to see if there's a chance that you may be able to view the International Space Station as it travels over your neighborhood. We haven't set it up for the Wheeling area, but you can reconfigure that page for any place on the planet. Now, who knows, maybe an off-planet. Without further ado, I'm going to run down to the launch pad of science, and today's topics, SpaceX. I know that a lot of you probably got up early this morning. Well, maybe you didn't. And the SpaceX launch that went off this morning without a flaw. Well, I was a little worried for a second there, but there was a launch this morning that you were able to watch live. I have a link to SpaceX where you can see a whole bunch of different stuff. Spoiler alert, they got back safely, so that's good. But it's kind of amazing how much stuff SpaceX has done in just the past week or so, or the couple of weeks. Then I know a lot of you are really concerned about the Chinese rocket debris that's going to rain down over, who knows where, someplace on the planet. Now, we have had a late-breaking update from, as it says, from the U.S. military that pinpoints more precisely where they think the debris will come crashing down to Earth. But just want to let you know, if you're in the Wheeling area, you're kind of within the original prediction envelope of being about 40 degrees northern latitude or southern latitude. So we'll take a look at that. And speaking of the Chinese, I have a quick little link to Zhurong, which is their rover is going to land on Mars very soon. So very interesting. We got a lot of they could probably have drag races up there at some point with all the different people that are sending probes and rovers to the planet Mars. A very interesting volcano in Iceland has been erupting. We have at the time it started erupting, somebody put up a continuous live link, so we're going to just check in with that. I mean, if we check in and there's nothing to see, we can assume maybe the cameras were all obliterated. But we take a look at that. Red spruce. Cool thing about something that used to be a very prominent part of the forest here in West Virginia. The Bering Transit, about how folks may have, this is some more theories on exactly how people came from Asia to the United States. story about antimatter, and not just antimatter floating around in little pieces, but the possibility of antimatter stars floating around in our universe. You'll like that. And then, as Robert and I are both interested in astronomy, as many of you are out there, we become more and more aware of problems with too much light. And of course, somebody has started calculating at a very high level the issues we're going to have with, I put it down as space junk. Now, to be correct, a lot of the stuff that will be causing problems will be things like the constellations of satellites, communication satellites that folks like SpaceX and others are launching. Bill Gates, a lot of folks are creating these networks. It sounds amazingly like a movie with Arnold Schwarzenegger in it, but they're going to be networks of thousands of small low Earth orbit satellites and higher Earth orbit satellites. But that's going to impinge on the ability to do good astronomy. So we're going to talk about that a little bit. And wait a minute, my browser just jumped back to, oh, here we go. So Archaea, a very interesting thing if you're a microbiologist, or even if you're not. Archaea are very important to many aspects of our life. So this is a story about one of the Archaea. And then Soberana. When I saw Soberana that I had posted last week, I had to say, wait a minute, what is this Soberana? Because I had forgotten what the actual story was. Soberana is apparently Spanish for sovereign. And it has to do with Cuba and their vaccines. So we're going to talk about some of the interesting things that, it's interesting how Cuba has been pretty much ignored or not talked about much in their efforts to fight COVID, even though they've done some pretty amazing things. It's not Shark Week, but we're going to talk a little bit about new information on the shark's ability to use magnetic, navigation. So that's really cool. Retrons. Now I know Retron sounds like it could be the name of a science fiction movie or some new particle, but it's really an interesting thing about genomic research, and then beyond just research, actual genomic engineering things. So that's pretty cool. A story about cell death, and that sounds a little depressing, except this story is about identifying some proteins that are very important to turning on or turning off the what is known as cell death. Like, your cells can replicate so many times, and at some point there are these intricate mechanisms that go, time for you to just shuffle off this mortal coil, as they say. Now, because I started you with the very early part of the series there with this Chinese rocket, I'm going to do the chart early. Now, Robert and Libby will probably call in, and if I get their call pretty soon, I'll be excited to talk to them about this, because we always do a chart. And this week, the chart that I'm going to click on is from the BBC News. It says, big Chinese rocket segment set to fall to Earth. Well, there's a great picture. I think there's a picture on the top of the article from the BBC folks of a rocket. It says, this rocket was launched to carry a Chinese space station section into orbit. And what I find fascinating about this story is, wow, all of a sudden I'm thinking, well, this is about debris falling to Earth, but the blurb under the picture is really kind of fascinating, because I haven't been following that closely, the fact that apparently the Chinese are building a space station section by section, without people talking too much about it. So here it's about the debris from the Chinese rocket is expected to fall back to Earth in an uncontrolled re-entry this weekend. The main segment from the Long March 5B vehicle was used to launch the first module of China's new space station last month. Okay, so it has already done its job. It's delivered the section of the space station. So at about 18 tons, it's one of the largest items in decades to have an undirected dive into the atmosphere. Okay, since this is the chart, I'm going to scroll right to the chart, as everybody knows that a good chart should tell you all the information. It's got a great title, Where Could the Rocket Core Land? And there's a nice little chart that kind of delineates a big swath of the world, and some of the cities that are pretty much included in it. If you think of, if you're in the Wheeling, West Virginia area, we're around latitude 40, something like that. So, give or take, we are within the 41.5 degrees north latitude and the 41.5 degrees south latitude. That could be the area, and this is the area that it's presently orbiting over. And if you have no idea exactly when it's going to come down, it could be at any time. And then people say, well, are there any big cities? Well, yes, Rio de Janeiro, Lagos, Sydney, Beijing, New York City, Wheeling, West Virginia. All of those cities are in the potential path. And the problem was until just a little while ago, it was very vague as to what the precise timing would be. Now, if you go back to if you're on the Launchpad of Science or radiosciencenews.org, and I'm waiting for my browser to go back, and it could be that they won't let it go back. I'll just have to go back and log in. If you look at the second story that we have on radiosciencenews.org today, and I will jump around before we talk a little bit more about SpaceX, because that's pretty cool. Chinese rocket. I found it interesting as I was looking for good information on where I could get more precise timing for the and the location for the most accurate thing I found was from the Hindustan Times. Now, I know my subscription to the Hindustan Times is probably not up to date, but from the folks at hindustantimes.com, edited by Kunal Gaurav, it says that the U.S. military predicts time and place of Chinese rocket debris crash. All you need to know. Yeah, and I'm going to say that, as I mentioned, I'm doing this sort of remote broadcast from Blackwater State Park here in West Virginia. And as we followed the weather report, we can tell you that predictions are not always what they would be. And there's a picture of it taking off, and it was launched on April 29th, 18 tons. The argument that the debris will just splash down in the ocean, given that the planet is 70% water, was put forward, but a lot of people go, oh, that's great. The chances of debris landing on an inhabited zone are tiny, he said. However, the latest prediction by the U.S. military, which is tracking the rocket segment, is not encouraging, according to CNN. The U.S. military has predicted that the debris will fall in Turkmenistan in Central Asia around 7 p.m. Eastern Time on Saturday. Wow, so 7 p.m. Eastern Time today, this would be something to watch for, whether or not it was something, dire, or whether it actually lands there or not. But that's pretty cool. And Jonathan McDowell, astrophysicist at the Harvard-Smithsonian Center for Astrophysics, said there is a real chance of damage to whatever it hits, suggesting an outside chance of a casualty. But it's not the first time this has happened. The Chinese have let debris from another Long March rocket fell on villages in the Ivory Coast, causing structural damage. But thank goodness to the probabilities of that worked out. Nobody was injured or killed. So anyway, this will be something to watch for. If you probably click back into your Google machine and check on that later today, you will probably get better information. We're going to stay with the Chinese and their efforts in space for just a second longer. This is actually about it says China is going to be landing their rover on Mars sometime in mid-May. Now, I'm thinking that it's possible that it won't land until after next week's Radio Science News show, so I'm not going to spend as much time on this. I'm just going to point you to this story. If successful, China will be the first country to land a rover on Mars in its first attempt. So that is pretty cool, actually. The United Arab Emirates, the Chinese, it says for the first few months of 2021, the Martian atmosphere was buzzing with new visitors from Earth. First, it was the United Arab Emirates Space Agency HOPE probe, and followed by the Chinese Tianwen entering its orbit. But the most recent activity, as they point out here, has been NASA landed the biggest ever rover on Mars, which included the ingenious helicopter. And we've been talking about that. This particular story has live links to all that stuff. So, if you want to click into the links on this story, and you'll get more. And it gives some background on how many missions have failed, and the kind of the things you have to deal with, and from Apollo missions of the 60s, the more recent SpaceX Dragons, they're talking about the techniques for landing on Mars, kind of orbits, the kind of things you do, strategy used to slow yourself down, air braking. Anyway, the The Zhurong is named after the fire god, Chinese, the fire god. And I'm looking for an exact date, but when they say mid-May, I'm going to assume that it's possible that it'd be great if it would just touch down next week when we're doing Radio Science News. I'm going to just leave this story for you to scroll through, maybe get some good background on it. It is interesting that that we're going to have so many rovers and things happening up on Mars at the same time. Now, the coincidence of all that is because everybody had to use the same launch window, which is based on, complex mathematics about the orbits and how your strategy to get there and whether you're going to use some gravitational, slingshotting, all sorts of stuff. So a lot of activity up there. And if you're in Iceland, now Robert was just visiting a really good friend of his, Ted Bradstrom, who's a big volcano expert. And of course, that's why he lives in Hawaii, among other reasons. But this particular volcano, I'm going to click on it. At first, I was going to see if I could actually pronounce it, the name of it from memory, but it's difficult to even pronounce the names of volcanoes in Iceland when you're reading it. And this is a YouTube channel that somebody put up. Oh, I'm going to probably
brush your
have
teeth in less than 10 seconds.
No, thanks. I brush my teeth longer than 10 seconds. Okay, this is a live volcanic eruption in Iceland, and I think it's updated. It's called FLO FlowCam, Saturday the 8th. And I'm going to skip the ads and first of all see what I can see. Okay, here it is. And this is actually live. So in some ways, if nothing really scary or dangerous is happening, a live volcanic eruption, and even right at this minute, 1,584 people are watching it live. Let me get that. I know you're worried that maybe space aliens landing, but that's my phone call from Robert and Libby Strong. Good morning, Robert and or Libby Strong.
Yes.
You're there. Wonderful.
Wasn't sure if we were to call in or not, but
Oh, sure.
So I did.
Hey, listen. You know why I always say when you're not sure, like when I think to myself, should I take an extra donut from the the buffet or not? I just do it. What do you think?
Absolutely.
Well, that seems reasonable, don't you think? Well, good to hear from you guys. Libby is happy to be calling in because I'm just right in her neighborhood. We're at my wife and I are at Blackwater State Park, Blackwater Falls, and we're up here at Cabin 10 if you want to stop by. Anybody that's listening to the streaming, just carry some firewood in because it just started snowing a few minutes ago, and we'll be happy. Is it snowing in Wheeling?
No.
It isn't? Oh, man. You guys get all...
Chilly and windy, but not snowing.
Wow, we've just had it's a little unusual. Yeah, we're all excited about getting some gardening done pretty soon, but it's been a little bit of a problem because the weather we keep thinking, oh, great, that was the last night of frost, and then we hear it changes. So, hey, we just need to be patient.
Right. It looks like you made it down into my hometown while you were there.
Well, I did, and of course, you're very famous there, but I would have to make sure that if I ask anybody, I said, hey, do you know Libby? They go, oh, do you mean? No, I actually, every place we went, we like to go sort of like antiquing and looking at historical things, and I haven't been to Petersburg since I went fishing there like in high school, and so I was only familiar with kind of cabins along the river there. But we really like Petersburg, West Virginia. I probably shouldn't say that because everybody will want to move there. And you actually not only grew up there, but isn't it true that you taught school there at one time?
I taught school in the county. I taught school at Union High School, which was at Mount Storm.
Oh, okay.
High school, and then there's the Valley High School. I was the mountain girl. But yeah, I lived between Baird and Gormania, not a foreign country, and
not a foreign country. I thought Gormania was a restaurant because it just sounds like where the gourmets come from. Gormania. Well, the interesting thing was every place we went, we would ask if they knew Libby Wilkerson. It is Wilkerson, right?
No, Wilkinson.
Wilkinson.
They call me Wilkerson, but it's Wilkinson.
Well, that's an easy mistake. I say that since I made it. Because the funny thing was we ran into a friend of yours. Did you see the email I sent you?
Yeah, we graduated together.
Yeah, and I could. It was so funny because she goes, "Oh, we went to school together," and it was. She has a really nice little store down there. One of the nice things that they are doing in Petersburg, West Virginia, is the area down. I mean, talk about a great area. It's right next to the. I guess this is the South Branch of the Potomac at that point.
Yep.
The South Branch of the Potomac and all of the railroad tracks going through. And what they have done is the particular store that your friend is in was like a big auto parts store right next to the railroad tracks, and then right next to that there's another. It may have been, I don't think it was the actual train depot, but maybe one of the warehouses next to it. And they're turning these all into really nice, stores that have all kinds of good stuff. One of them I think is affiliated with Tamarack directly, so you have everything West Virginia there, But we had a good time. Now, one of the people that didn't know you, Libby, I don't want to hurt your feelings, was a guy that has a couple has moved back, and they've opened up a neat little antique store. And because I always hope that I'll go in and I won't see anything I want. You know how that is. But sadly, they had a really nice banjo for sale. Sounds a little bit like that. Did you hear that?
Yeah.
I actually used it for the theme song. You can see that it's actually the perfect theme. I'm going to have to call it the Banjo of Science from now on. That I got in Petersburg. Very, very nice story. It's actually a local musician owned it. And I got his name and history. Mr. Lowe, Lough, that lived. He was a machinist and had a real interesting story. And so they were real happy that this banjo was going. Well, they admitted that, or this was their assertion, that this banjo would be going to a good home. So I'm not sure. But anyway, I thought you'd like that little story. Petersburg, West Virginia, home of banjos.
Home of the golden trout.
Oh yeah, now does Petersburg also have a hatchery there?
Oh yeah, a couple of them.
That's what I thought. I actually, as a young Boy Scout, I caught a golden trout the first year they had him out in the lakes and ponds and things. So I have a great love for the I'm going to add Petersburg to my list of great places to love. So. Hey, Robert, did you see any volcanoes while you were on your visit?
I did.
You did?
Yeah.
Whoa.
Yeah. Now I had not seen any red glowing rock.
Okay.
But I did see a great amount of fumes and steam.
Nice. Well, the story I've gone through a couple stories, and I'm actually on the the volcano. I found a YouTube. They call it a flow cam, and they update it. Well, they don't update it. They just let this continuously run. And when I first logged on, there were 1,800 some people watching, and now it's dropped off a little bit. But the camera is just kind of aimed at the most active part of the ongoing eruption in Iceland.
Right.
Hey, we welcome you. It has a little channel, and it has separate cameras. They're running 3 live feeds. I'm looking down a little bit lower. You can get the flow cam. So one of them is temporarily down, but the other 2 are up. And they're in the names of some of the fissures. It doesn't represent anything else. I thought that was pretty cool. So anyway, this for those of you who like to. I mean, this is probably better than staring at cable news.
Probably, yeah.
Yeah, maybe even less volatile. I'm sure that the smoke, if not the mirrors, might be. But as I'm looking at it now, there's a good bit of lava splashing, as it's building this small cone. So if you get a chance to look at that, that would be fun. I'm going to go back to the launch pad of science, and we talked a little bit about the Chinese rocket that may crash into Wheeling anytime, and the Chinese rover. I didn't go to SpaceX yet because I was waiting to see if they updated their site. So if you're following along, Robert, back there on your high-tech computer, and you go to SpaceX, I was looking. The reason why I was looking for this is because we have a good friend that lives close to, I want to say, Chincoteague, over there on the east coast of America. And one of the things that they said is, hey, anytime there's a launch going on over there, they said, you're invited to come on down and we'll watch the launch together. And I just happened to see that, unfortunately, well, maybe fortunately, it's not, the SpaceX was not launching from that particular site. They were launching from their Brownsville, Texas, soon-to-be giant spaceport. And I was able to just coincidentally find the feed 5 minutes before they launched. And Mary Beth and I, of course, we always like to get up with a cup of coffee and watch Elon Musk launch something into space. And it was the Starship SN-15, which is going to be their big heavy launch vehicle. And the part that's really kind of interesting, if you had seen it recently, they had launched one and it came down and it didn't quite slow down fast enough.
Right.
Or it didn't slow down slow enough. I think that's what I should say, because it did definitely go fast enough to crash into the ground and explode. And this past Wednesday, they apparently, the turnaround on their stuff is pretty amazing. So they had launched Starship SN-15 like Wednesday, and they had a very successful flight. And I think that's the one that they have posted on their site. They haven't, and when I say posted, it's like a whole, you'll go there, it says Flight Test Starship SN-15 rewatch, and I think you get to see the Wednesday successful flight. The flight today was actually, it was really impressive to watch, except for a couple things where maybe cameras went out briefly. You got to see a view from inside the, you could see the three rockets, and the camera work was just really great, except for they did kind of go out, but it went up 8 or 10 kilometers, and it hovered there for a while, and then they turned it sideways so that it would come back down, and it would use air braking configuration. And then the whole trick is to calculate when to rotate it back into a vertical position, and then fire the rocket so that it touches down without damage. And it was really pretty astonishing to watch it. They were a little concerned because after it touched down gently and everything looked good, there was a nice big fire at the base of it. But they explained that, and I kept thinking the guy sounds a little nervous, like he's afraid, well, any second I'm going to have to mention that it's blowing up. But it just was, they said it was just residual methane that was kind of, fuming off and burning at the end. So that was cool. I'm just going to recommend anybody, if you do go to the SpaceX.com page and listen to this whole, where it has a rewatch, it's like about an hour or something. A lot of it is where they're asking Elon Musk about different things related to it. They even had some questions about, well, how is this going to mess up Brownsville, Texas, when you start launching and creating a giant spaceport, and what's going to happen to property values, and on and on and on. That was all very interesting. But Robert, you and I sometimes, we're not as fond of Elon as everybody. Sometimes he could be kind of a little smart alecky and all that. But I did want to pass along one interesting thing that he talked about. And I was really surprised because years ago, I remember we were talking, it just happened to be, I was at the Governor's School for Math and Science, and we were talking about energy stuff, and it was when they were starting to do this was a long time ago, when they started to get natural gas in West Virginia. They were, digging, drilling for it and talking about, well, coal versus natural gas. And one of the things that somehow I got into a conversation with one of the people was, for crying out, you and I talked about this too, how crazy it was to be using liquid oxygen and liquid hydrogen and mixing them and getting all complicated. The Elon, and at that time we were saying that a lot of people advocated that it made more sense to use methane instead of hydrogen. And so you have liquid oxygen in the right amount, right proportions with your methane. Well, I was surprised to find out that that's the launch fuel of choice for the whole SpaceX effort. And the section that I wanted to mention to you and to the listeners was that he was talking about Elon Musk you could tell he's in his public relations mode and trying to calm people's fears that, if they come to Brownsville, it's going to ruin things. And he was saying that it was talking about how it was going to bring a lot of better industries. Well, one of the things that he talked about was how silly it was to have to truck in liquid oxygen and all that. And so he was going to establish facilities right in the area to actually create what they needed for their fuel. So they would have methane, and however they compressed it and had it ready, and then they would get their own liquid oxygen. He went through a brief thing about exactly what they're going to do. They are working on a lot of we've talked about trying to extract carbon dioxide from the atmosphere over the years, as you may well remember. And we've had a lot of our friends who have kind of said, well, why aren't we doing that? Why? Well, there are problems to it because it takes complex catalysts and all that. But Elon Musk and the bunch have basically made that one of their goals is that they're going to have a process to extract CO2 from the atmosphere, and then so they have CO2, and then they're going to use water. And what they're basically going to do is they're going to produce all of their own methane and liquid oxygen. And so it's going to be, except for the fact when they're burning it again in the atmosphere, it's going to be maybe the first net CO2 removal strategy that I've seen that looks successful. So, hey,
Good.
I'm going to give him some credit for it,
All right.
Well, all right, now somebody else that you guys know, you are very familiar with Kathy Stout and Ben Stout.
Yes.
One of the nice things that happened, and I know that when you're traveling and doing odd things, like one of the main things that happens at Blackwater Falls this time of year is there's a big well-established Wildflower Pilgrimage. And it's been going on for, I want to say, 20 or 30 years at least. Very well organized. This year it's been centered at Canaan Valley and that resort because I guess they're renovating Blackwater Falls Lodge. But my wife and her friends would come down, whenever they could, and they did it several times over the years. But if you're familiar with Blackwater Falls, there's a trail that goes to Lindy Point, and it's probably one of the neatest places, and it's one of the few places where you can find pink lady slippers that bloom. I mean, these are really rare flowers. It takes 16 years for them to mature into the plant that can actually bloom. And so we basically been going, when we first got here, they were just coming up, and right now they're almost at the point where they're going to bloom. And we found ourselves thinking about the fact that, Robert, aren't there several billion people on the planet now?
Yes.
About 8 billion now, and rising, I'm pretty sure. I know that the polls said the United States was losing population, but so I was telling Mary Beth, I said, it's amazing to me that with the 8 or 10 billion people on the planet and whatever things they're doing, that we were like the only people who had walked out to Lindy Point on this really beautiful day, which actually was in contradiction to the bad weather reports that we were expecting. But we ran into a person named Mary. Now, you may know this person too. Mary Wimmer was her name. And I thought she sounded familiar, as if we may have seen her at like, science NSTA things or something like that. But, because they had WVU stuff, I kind of asked them and ended up finding they were from WVU. And she was she's the retired biochemist from WVU. And we talked about the cool stuff that was happening with the national radio down in Green Bank with finding molecules in space. And we made a good time. But when I said we were from Wheeling, she said, "Oh, do you know Ben Stout?" And that started a good conversation about Ben, who was one of their dear friends who has passed away, and then our friend Kathy Kyle Stout, who is the person along with her husband who put together the caddisfly jewelry thing, which I think you guys still have at your store.
Yes, we did.
We did.
Yeah, so we talked up caddisflies and all that. And then she said, "Well, did you know Ben's partner, David Seville?" And I said, "Was that the guy who did the Chipmunks albums?" And she goes, "No, not that David Seville." So this next story, if you click on the story about red spruce, we had talked about just different projects like the American. She's involved in the West Virginia American chestnut restoration, and I said, well, I am too, and then I'm actually a member of the New York chapter because they're working on the chestnut thing. And she said, oh, well, tell me about it. And we talked about the chestnuts, and then she told me about David Seville, who was Ben Stout's partner in the all kinds of water research. They have a thing. Their website is restoreredspruce.org, and it's actually Central Appalachian Spruce Restoration Initiative. And I was fascinated about it. I actually got his name and checked an email and got in touch with him, and he sent me a link to it's CASRI, that long acronym for the for this whole thing to restore the red spruce. Now, the reason why red spruce is so important to a lot of people is that it was one of the primary, back in the day, and this was sort of reminiscent of the chestnut. They were just clear cut. It says from the site, it says red spruce and red spruce northern hardwood forest once dominated the highest elevations of West Virginia, covering more than 500,000 acres. But in the 1800s and early 1900s, they pretty much clear cut all the forest, including the red spruce dominated stands. So it says there are only about 30,000 acres left that have red spruce in it. So this whole project has come about to begin this. And now at the end of the thing, it says over 1,798 acres of high elevation lands placed on trajectory to develop into functioning red spruce ecosystems, bringing the total to almost about 6,000 acres. So this is really a cool program. And just as parenthetically, as President Biden would say, the reason why this is interesting to me is that if you are a musician and you play like a really fine, expensive, say like Martin guitar, and it was from the pre-war era and it's worth a fortune, it was almost always made with red spruce is the general term for it, but they call it Appalachian spruce or Adirondack spruce, and it's kind of all the same thing, the red spruce. And even apparently Stradivarius violins were made with this. So I'm really excited about running into some people that are doing that, and we'll probably be in touch with them, and maybe, who knows, we could even interview them on Radio Science News sometime. Now, just because for full disclosure, I have to also tell you, Robert, that as a promise to one of our friends, they said if you're in Davis, you have to stop at the distillery and visit the people there. And I said, well, I guess distillation is a science. Isn't that a science? It's very important to chemistry. It just depends on what you're distilling. Wouldn't you agree? And so we did stop and visit them, and it was fun again because even though what they're doing is apparently, Robert, they're distilling alcohol. Isn't that
really?
I couldn't believe it. And the place had been closed forever, and he just happened to be open. And we told him, we said, well, wow, we wanted to just visit you earlier, but you were always closed. And he said, well, he opened up 4 months ago, and he made enough product. I'm just going to use that term product loosely because I think to be exact, he makes some moonshine, and he makes some what would be more characterized, I think, as brandy. He does a lot of, it's like apple brandy and stuff like that. And I said, well, that's all well and good, but I'm going to give credit for, I think it's called New Heritage Distillation or Distillers. He had an innovative thing, as he was actually making some moonshine from excess maple syrup that was in the market. And when he said that, I said, that reminds me of a story. Do you remember our good friends at Brook Hills Park who were doing maple syrup?
Yes.
And you and I, we talked to them about, of course, being math people, and you more than I perhaps, we were talking about all the hard work that they do to gather 40 gallons or so of maple sap, of just pure sap right out of the tree, which then they subject to heat and torture until they get it down to about a gallon of maple syrup.
Right.
And we said, well, man, that is really wasteful. And our good, I think it was Ed. Anyway, the gentleman said, what I really like to do when I'm out in the woods doing maple syrup, he said, I'll just sneak a little cupful of the pure sap from the tree when it comes out, and it's just maybe at the most 1 to 2% sugars from, that what you would end up with as maple sugar. But he would say, if you sip that, that's the best thing you could ever imagine. So, as you know, we went back and forth with him and explained to him that the smart thing to do would be to just bottle the straight. I think we told him, yeah, call it the Tree of Life drink, and
That's right. Yep.
And I'm just doing this on Radio Science News because when we talked about it, it was such a good idea, and we could never quite get them to do that because they ended up just doing maple syrup. And I just thought this is, again, one of our Radio Science News billion-dollar industries that we would be willing to give away. So I explained, we were sitting there, and he talked about making moonshine from maple syrup, and I told him the story about you and I and Ed sitting down and talking, and the idea that you could that if you drink the pure sap, which I have done because we tapped a couple of our trees just for fun to see how tough it would be, and not only maple trees but walnut trees, other trees can be tapped, and the difference between, say, maple syrup and what you get right out of the tree is that if anybody who has made maple syrup, you know that when you're boiling off, to get it down to a sugary content, everything that you smell, all those wonderful smells and aromas and light aromatic, those things disappear. They're gone.
Exactly. Yes.
You've stripped everything away down to just the sugars. So the thing that was really wonderful about talking with this guy was the instant I mentioned how smart it would be just to maybe market a product with the pure sap, and I was maybe just 10 seconds into, like the rationales about, he got everything. He says, oh my gosh, he said, that's like the coconut water people are doing. And he said, you could, and it was one of those fun things where you said, you saw a fire that was lit and then the conflagration just took off. So I'm just going to say at some point, I told him we would be in touch with him because I said, instead of selling alcohol and moonshine to people, you could be selling, and I said, hey, you could call it, the Tree of Life, liquor, or whatever you want to do. And he was excited about it and said, he would really think about it. So
Good.
we're going to see how that goes. Anyway, and that came from just our local bumping into people. I'm going to run down, we have a bunch of stories, but I want to click on ones that I think you and I would find they're all fascinating because it is Radio Science News. But did you say you're on your computer or not?
No.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm going to click over. I can give you the skinny on the story from this one's from Live Science. It's about antimatter. And Robert and I are obligated, if it's anything about nanotechnology or graphene or antimatter or black holes, we usually are obligated by contract to cover the story.
True.
So this story, which has as its headline, Robert, stars made of antimatter could exist in the Milky Way. The astronomers, it says, are trying to solve the mystery of anti-helium by searching for anti-stars. And this is a very long article, but basically they're apparently using the alpha magnetic spectrometer in orbit. And it says the AMS has been used in a search for antimatter. The thing that's fascinating about this story, though, is that it says over the estimated 100 billion stars in our galaxy, they think that they're talking about, it says no more than 14 may be made from antimatter, according to this new study. And, it's kind of one of for the longest time, as I was talking to the people about using Green Bank, you can use the signals from molecules in space, and either in the case of the Green Bank, they were finding precursors to amino acids and other things like that.
Right.
So apparently they were looking, in just searching for anti-helium. So the anti-stars would fuse anti-hydrogen into anti-helium to produce light. But otherwise, you couldn't tell them. Because basically, instead of regular hydrogen being fused into regular helium and light coming out, it would be, anti-hydrogen and anti-helium. But as far as our observation, we would just be, incapable of distinguishing them from a regular star.
You know what? At first glance, that does sound true.
Yeah.
But on the second glance, no.
Yeah.
And the reason is that that being that all stars give off a solar wind.
Yeah.
Okay, that solar wind would be made out of what? Antimatter.
Yeah.
When that solar wind goes out from the star and interacts with the other with the solar wind of the other stars, the antimatter solar wind will interact with the matter solar wind from the surrounding stars, and there's going to be a glow around that star because the antimatter solar wind and the matter solar winds are going to interact and turn into a gamma ray storm.
Well, see, guess what? See, I'm going to give you extra points because the kind of gist of the story, even though they don't go through the very clear thing that you mentioned, because they just sort of mention up here at the top that so what they coupled with the data that they coupled with their observations here were by using NASA's Fermi Gamma Ray Telescope.
There you go. Yeah.
And it says that the co-authors uncovered 14 examples of, now they're talking about small compact objects shining brightly in gamma rays that didn't show up in other star catalogs, meaning scientists don't know what they are. And so just as I think you much more eloquently, delineated what it's kind of like what we always thought when they were looking for the exoplanets. It's not, you might not see it directly, but as you said, anytime the solar wind that would be coming from these stars would come into contact with anything else, it's going to have maybe even a particular signature. But
exactly. Yeah.
In this case, they were just using the broad concept that they were finding these small, spots of gamma rays that shouldn't be there, or they didn't expect to be there. I'm never going to say they shouldn't be there. That's beyond me.
Exactly. Yeah.
Anyway.
I mean, if these antimatter stars do exist, then where the antimatter star wind interacts with the rest of the star winds out some distance from the star, the gamma rays are going to be a certain kind of gamma rays.
Yeah.
That should be unmistakable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That is, well, and it is so cool. Again, like I said, they didn't even really exactly mention it that clearly in the article, but I'm going to say that's the basis of what they're doing. So it's very cool. And like I said, you're not even in front of your high-tech computer. You're just listening to me.
I am not. No.
So you get I give you extra points. All right, I'm going to the next topic I had for that was I put it up as space junk. And now calling this space junk may not be the nicest thing. I mean, we were doing, Libby and I were talking briefly about this last week, but I thought now you're going to want to look at this. But the story is it's from the Royal Astronomical Society. I don't know, you probably didn't get your subscription yet this month. Volume 504, Issue 1. But this is it's actually really well done. And it's talking about, early on we mentioned Elon Musk and people like, I guess, maybe Bill Gates and Elon Musk and folks who are launching these big satellite networks, a cloud of satellites into various orbits. This is a really cool, scholarly, and very mathematical analysis of the proliferation of space objects is rapidly increasing source of artificial night sky brightness. And of course, we've talked about space junk before, mostly in terms of there's so much stuff up there that's just debris and junk floating around. But I'm going to step over the line, and I'm going to say that too much of this stuff up here, I'm going to agree with the folks in this little article that are talking about the fact that this is going to cause some real issues for good astronomy. It says here, let me give you just a couple sentences. The population of artificial satellites and space debris orbiting the Earth imposes, and I love scientists, they say non-negligible constraints. I think they could have just said significant constraints on both space exploration or space operations and ground-based optical and radio astronomy. And he goes on to immediately discuss the ongoing deployment of several satellite mega constellations in the 2020s represents an additional threat. So anyway, when you get a chance, I know you will sit down.
I will.
When I scrolled down through, it has great charts. It's got all these very complicated sky brightness, and there's a chart showing the directions and the angles, and it's the kind of charts that you look at. It has like R sub S and Y lambda. It's just you're going, okay, now I need to get my program out. Spectral radiance charts, and these are all calculus differential. It's really, I'm saying it's really well done. But the long shot of it is in a nice little chart. It gives you an idea of the altitude versus the spatial density of the materials at zenith sky luminous and estimate, and just it's really well done. And I'm sure that our friends at the that are fighting so hard to limit the amount of sky pollution or night pollution, what sky glow as they just boil it down to here, is really this is really important stuff. But
yes, I just want to say that just as it's a morally irresponsible thing to put up a bright dust sunlight in a dark sky area, it's morally wrong. It is also morally wrong that Elon Musk and anyone else that thinks that they have the right to ruin the nighttime sky for the entire world.
Yeah. Well, and I you know what I like? I like the fact that the way you put that, I could kind of like throw Walmart and Elon Musk into the same basket to a certain extent.
I do.
Right.
Yes, I do.
There are better ways to do this stuff, or at least
there certainly are.
Or at least send up.
If you want a satellite in Earth orbit, then you should go before a board, and that board should say, if that satellite is not jet black,
there you go.
Not go up.
Yeah, I mean, in some ways, it's not that we're necessarily arguing against the progress of what they want to do.
Absolutely not.
It reminds me of the story that we would run across about the fact that if people who were concerned about the windmills, there was actually a way to give them an exact particular. They had already figured out the exact color and stuff that did not attract insects and birds and things like that. So.
Right.
It's like some of the things that are opposed by people, it's not just a knee-jerk thing. You're going, well, look, if you're going to do this, at least be responsible about how you do it. So
precisely, yes. And what irritates me is that Elon Musk has access to these people around, and so it's very easy for him to solve this. And he's not interested. Yeah. Well,
I think that would be one of the criticisms we'd have if you're going to do something. I mean, even the stuff he's doing, as we've talked about in the Mars effort and all this, a lot of the things you're going to do, you need to just make sure that you're covering your bases and not just trammeling everything that is important here. All right, I'm going to the next story in sequence just so I can remember all the stories I covered this time. It's about Archaea. Now, Libby being a biologist, one of the things we've covered stories on Radio Science News about microbes. Back when we were like whippersnappers, when you talked about microbes, it was kind of an interesting thing. You could still reflect on the fact that people didn't even know about people knew about bacteria, but it was a great thing when they found out that viruses existed. Like, that was important. But one of the things that has emerged over the past couple of decades is what they call Archaea, which are just really, really ancient organisms. Now, and the reason why this particular story popped up on Science News, this is just this past week, I think, it says some of the first evidence, this particular Archaea is called Brocker Archaeota. Brocker Archaeota. Sounds like an actor I think I heard of once. It's an entirely new group of microbes with a never seen. It's never before been recognized as a metabolism in microbes. This particular one is from hot springs in Yunnan, Tengjiang, Yunnan province in China. And it's very cool because it looks a little bit like Yellowstone Park. You know, they have steps down to all these hot springs and nice little safety things. But the cool thing about these particular microbes, it says, unlike similar tiny single-celled organisms that live deep in sediments and munch on decaying plant matter, these Archaea don't produce methane as part of an end product of their metabolism. So this is really fascinating. It says our information they're a particularly mysterious group. It wasn't until the 1970s that Archaea were even looked into, and they're thought to live in only the most extreme environments. You know, the extremophiles, and it's been one of the things they've talked about that we might find in space. But they make a little comparison between, they're talking about methane producing Archaea are in cows' stomachs. Then we weren't familiar with that. But the thing that is absolutely cool about this is that you could have, in terms of remediating at least, to be able to digest all this kind of material, but then not have methane as an end product.
Wow.
Is just really cool. It says that these particular Archaeota, as it turns out, actually lived all over the world until now. They were overlooked, underdescribed, and unnamed. And I'm going to say underappreciated too. So
Yeah.
this is really cool. Nice long story, and it's right now there are only about 9 sites on the planet where they found them. Yellowstone Park being one of them.
Sure.
And this is just like a breaking news. It's very cool.
That is cool.
It says they do munch on the same materials that methane-producing Archaea do, one-carbon compounds like methanol or methyl sulfide, but as far as yet they couldn't identify the genes that produce methane. So basically, it's a genetic issue where the metabolism of this one evolved, and they do not have within their genome the particular genes that allow other bacteria and Archaea to produce methane. So that is just really cool. All right, Robert, Shark GPS. I don't know if Shark Week is coming up. Is it coming up again soon? Who could say?
Probably.
No, probably. You know it's going to happen. Yeah. So I'm just going to mention this. I'm going to be watching my time because I actually, not having you to help me engineer this project, I started a little bit late. So I'll be watching the clock, and I'm going to try to get my my theme song and even maybe play the banjo music again. Who knows? I don't want to overpromise. But this is a really cool story because we have talked about so many different organisms. I'll read the summary. This is from Science News, also May 6th. It says sea turtles are known for relying on magnetic signatures to find their way across thousands of miles to the very beaches where they hatched. Now researchers have some of the first solid evidence yet that sharks also rely on magnetic fields for their long-distance forays across the sea. All right, I'll tell you what, I'm going to see if I can start the music here. Oh, man, it worked. Of course, it's probably so loud it's going to drown out my banjo. That's terrible. See if I can turn it. No. All right, as we fade out, you'll get to hear the banjo science that was retrieved from Petersburg, West Virginia. Plucking right along. All right, I'm going to really lean into it now, Robert. And invite everybody back next week. Radio Science News, 11 till 12 on Saturday. Yay, that's all we got. Thank you for tuning in.
Wonderful.